All right, good morning, everybody. This is Frank Whitmer at Brody Precision. And actually wasn't up till about 2 o'clock yesterday. I decided that we'd just make this one our topic. I was in the middle of putting together a video for the CIPer 50 and how to get in the shell and how to restore it to factory defaults back at its earliest version of 4.4. And through some hurdles and some other things, I was able to get that working. So I thought I would share it as a video. And then I think for Tech Tuesday, it's not a bad one to do. We did a Tech Tuesday in March of last year on the CIPer Model 50. And I'm not going to go through all of the ins and outs of the controller. When we go through this video, if there's questions at the end, that's fine. We can do that. But really where I wanted to go with this was to make everybody aware when they're working with a CIPer Model 50, it runs Niagara. It's like a Jace. It is, you hear people say, yeah, it's the same as a Jace with I/O on board. One of the areas where it's very different is how shell mode is used and what you can do from there. I just wanted to point those features out now rather than later when I'm getting a support call when somebody's having issues, which is the reason for me making this video because of a couple recent support calls. One was they had 4.8 running on their CIPer 50, and they had a station that was a 4.7, and they wanted to put it on a site that was 4.7. And doing a clean dist, which is what you would do in a Jace in the past, would take you to the earliest version that it supports. And the clean dist for the CIPer 50 keeps you at the version you're at, and so it doesn't get you back to the earlier version. So that's one of the main reasons I'm putting this together and have it posted up on our BP Tech Center. Again, today's topic, it's shell and factory reset or factory restore. If we go in and go through here, I thought I'd start with a review of what the factory settings are, since that's a big part of what you're doing with the shell mode on a Niagara device. And with the CIPer 50, you have basically 3 Ethernet ports. You got your standards, primary and secondary port 1 and 2. And out of the box, it's 192.168.200.20 and 201.20 for port 2. And there's also a USB 2 port on the face of the 50 that is Ethernet over USB. So when you plug in with a USB 2 type of cable into the front of that, you are assigned an IP address on your PC, and you're connecting to the CIPer 50 at 192.168.255.241. So it's an easy way to gain access to it. If you're already using the other ports for other things on a site, you have a port that you can get into, and it can't be changed. So it's a port you can trust is always going to be there. The platform credentials out of the box, the passphrase is Niagara, the username is Tritium, and the password is Niagara. And the earliest supported version that can run on the CIPer 50 is 4.4 U3, which is 4.4.94. So as we go through this, I'm going to be showing how you can take it back to that version of 4.4. And once you go back there, you could take it up to 4.7 or 4.8 from there. So if we start going through there and what the functionality is of shell, and you'll see it's very different from a standard Jace. Network setup, okay, that's a standard thing that a Jace would have. So you have the ability to go in and do network setup, so you can do the primary port and the secondary port and change those IP addresses from shell. You can reboot the Jace. Obviously, when you change an IP address, you got to reboot, so it gives you the ability to do that. Another feature in there is allows you to reset to factory default. And all that means is it wipes out the Jace as far as your modules, your station, everything's gone, resets your credentials and your passphrase, and resets the TCP settings. That's the reason I put the slide before that to show what those things are, that what those defaults are that you would go back to. And the license stays intact. The license will be there after you do the reset to factory default. And then there's another option there called service. And what it does is it allows you to restore a factory image or a factory firmware from USB. So you can have a USB flash drive, plug it into the edge of the CIPer 50, and then when you invoke service and you have a subsequent yes, no, you got to answer to, it will restore the image. Another part, and this is probably the most critical piece, you can't just go into your bag of tricks like you used to with I don't care what Jace it was, the old 403s, 545s, 300s, 600s, 700s. They all had their, null modem serial cable, or they had a RJ45 with a converter to USB. None of that works with the CIPer 50. It is a specific cabling that's required. And I've put on here the requirements for it. And basically it's a 9-pin adapter, but basically it's only using 3 wires off of an RJ45. So it's using pin 2, 3, and 5. And I looked originally at my old RJ45 cabling that I used for the old 403s, and it is different. I believe on the 403s it was using pin 6 instead of 5. There was a wiring difference and it wouldn't work. So the difference is basically you're going to go USB to RS-232, and then with this adapter actually works out really well. I got mine on Amazon. It's got a terminal strip built into it, so it's real easy to put together and allow access then to the shell mode, or to the COM port on the CIPer 50. If we look at the edge of the CIPer 50, there's your port 1 and 2 Ethernet ports. There's an RJ45 below that, and that's the RS-232 port, and that's where you're going to be plugging this your shell cable to. And then up next to the main Ethernet ports, there's a USB 2 interface there, and that's where you're going to be putting your thumb drive, your memory stick, if you're going to be restoring back to the old firmware on the controller.
We did go ahead and get some of those in, and then we'll offer that and give that.
Okay, pre-made cables.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because that was always the problem with the old 403s. I think my cabling for that, I've probably lent out 3 times more often than I've used it myself in the office. And it was one of those that we had once in a while. We had a couple in, and that was a little more difficult to build. And then it was a special RJ45 satin cable that was needed. But with this, like I said, it's straightforward, simple, and the worst part is to be on a job having a problem and having to do this and have no way of making up a cable. So we're going to be able to have that available for everybody to be able to purchase. The connection, once you have the cabling and you're connected up, we use PuTTY for our terminal emulation. You can use HyperTerminal. PuTTY seems to be the main one these days. And you're connecting just like you would with an 8000. It's 115, 200 for the baud rate, 8 data bits, 1 stop bit, no parity, no flow control. You're going to read some documentation of Tritium's that says flow control is hardware. And then I get the call and say, well, anything I type doesn't show up in HyperTerminal, doesn't show up in PuTTY. It's because flow control isn't set for none. So you have to make sure you have that set for none. And that's the settings. And then obviously the COM port will be dependent on your laptop, and which, when you have your USB to 232 cable plugged into your USB port. And the best thing to do there is to go to Device Manager, and under ports, you can tell which port number is being used for your RS-232 adapter. So if we look at, I've just got some screenshots of the shell mode, and we'll actually go live in there and play with it. But initially, when you connect with shell on boot, I shouldn't say on boot, when you first plug into it, you're just going to have a cursor blinking on your screen. It's not like a Jace where you hit enter and it comes back with a prompt, and then you can go to your menu or log in or whatever you're trying to do within there. The CIPer 50 set up, and it has a countdown on every step of the way. I mean, if we jump ahead and we look, here's an enter your choice here, 47 seconds. That was if you had, I think it was 59 seconds to make a choice here. There were other areas, well, when you first go into shell, you get 3 seconds to go to configuration mode. So when you first plug in, it's timed out because nobody's used shell in a while or at all. So you have to cycle power in order to have the menu come up. So when you boot up, this is the standard code that boots up. And then it'll come up and say, press C to enter configuration menu. And it starts with 3. So it doesn't give you very much time, but at least you visually get to see how much time you have. Hit C. Doesn't matter, capital, lowercase, same thing through the rest of the menus. Then you enter the configuration menu, which is the boot menu. You can log in, reset the factory default, service, and reboot. That's it. They're the options you get. There's nothing more in here like you had with a Jace 600, 8,000, 700, whatever. So that first menu item of login, basically it's asking you for your platform credentials. So it gives you, it'll start counting down. So if you go and hit 1, it'll give you, like I said, I think there it's 60 seconds. You can enter the username, enter the password, and then you come up with the menu, the main menu, which is going to be network setup and reboot. That's what you get to do once you log in. So network setup gives you the ability of the primary port, the secondary port, being able to turn on or turn off DHCP. You can set the IP address and the network mask, the gateway and host name. They're the options that you have for your network setup. I did one thing here. I'm getting pinged in my ear. Turn on Do Not Disturb on my phone. Sorry about that. So these are your choices for it. Once you make your changes on your network setup, you're going to hit S for it's save changes and exit. So somehow in the translation from Germany, save became safe. But so S to save, and then obviously when you change your IP address settings, you got to reboot. So you're going to go back. When you go back to the menu, you're going to hit R for reboot, and then you'll reboot the CIPer 50, and you'll be able to get in. So initially out of the box, as I said, it was the primary port was 192.168.200.20. So if you're playing in here and you reset to defaults, you want to get back in with your laptop, just since you're already in shell, just go in the network setup and change that first port to whatever you want, and then you're able to get in. The next option in the main boot menu, the configuration menu as they call it, is reset to factory default. Now you would think that means resetting to factory default means out of box, but basically what it is, it's out of box for your TCP/IP settings. It's for your passphrase. It's for your password and username for the platform. And it also blows away your station that you have in there, and also the modules or whatever you used when you configured or you commissioned your controller. But it keeps it at the current version, the firmware version that you were working in. So if it was sitting at 4.8, you're still going to be at 4.8. So this is a way to be able to get in there and go back to defaults and back to a new image, I guess, at the version that you were running at. This is the only way to reset your credentials. So if you forget or don't know, or you woke up to a CIPer 50 that somebody else put in, and if you don't know your passphrase, you don't know your platform username and password, this is the only way to do it. And as I said, it blows away your station as well. So hopefully you can get in the station and do a backup from there so you don't lose everything. This doesn't have the same feature that an 8000 has, where you can go in and select, it was menu item 8 on an 8000, where it would come up with an unlock code that we would send off to Tritium, and then they would send a code back that could be used to reset the platform and the credentials without touching the station or any of the modules that are installed. So with this, you got all or nothing. You got to know how to get in, or you're gonna have to clear it out to get back into it. So that's a big thing to remember. So when you choose F for reset factory default, it will come up and it's going to tell you it's going to reset device to factory conditions. Then you have a yes, no. Capital or lowercase, doesn't matter. You go ahead and say yes. And I usually still go back and do a reboot. And then when you go into your workbench and you log in with platform, since we're at the default credentials, it forces you to change the passphrase, the platform account username, and the password to go along with that. So it is going to force you to do that just like it would when you first take it out of the box for secure purposes. The next piece that you can do, and that was something if we just, let's see, we go back here, that service menu item, S, is a option that allows you to restore firmware. And this is what you're going to use if you want to take it back to an earlier version than the version you're running. So if you're at 4.8 or 4.7, you want to totally wipe it out and go back, you would use this option. So basically, you're taking your USB memory stick and you're going to plug it into the USB port on the edge of the CIPer 50. But basically, well, before you do that, you're going to plug it into your laptop. You need to create a folder called Service, and then under Service, you put the two factory files, the two firmware files, in that folder. And these are the two right now that are available. It's to get it back to, like I said, 44U3, which is Niagara 4.4.94, 14.1.9. So you have both of these. Once you have them on your thumb drive, you're going to eject it and install it or plug it into the side of your CIPer 50. You're going to want to obviously be connected with your serial shell cable, and then you're going to power cycle to 50 because shell will have been timed out already. And then once you do, like we were showing in the menus, you're going to hit C to go to the configuration menu and hit S for service. And then what it's going to do is it prompts you with this over here, basically saying it's going to install a service package on the device, which may reset configurations or delete the station. It's not may, it will. So you're going to connect that USB stick, and then you press Y for yes to go ahead and continue. And basically the firmware will be updated to 4.4 and all data will be erased. And basically out of the box, you're going to be sitting at 4.4 U3. So when you do that, all the licenses that have been imported, certificates that have been imported, they get blown away. The default credentials get used, the default passphrase gets used, and I found late last night the time zone actually goes back to GMT, so it goes back to time zone 0. So that obviously you need to make sure then that when you recommission or restore via distribution backup, you must import your licensing and your certificates. Otherwise, when it starts up, you're going to right away it's going to fail, and you're going to wonder why, and it's because you don't have a license in there. And you're going to make sure you set the time as well. So if you're doing a commission, one of the steps in there, you can check off to set local time, so it'll do it for you. But once you go through this process, you're at 4494, and then if you have a distribution backup at 4.7 or 4.8, you could use that to use the distribution restorer in platform in Workbench and restore a backup to get up and running again on your CIPer 50. So basically, again, on the shell side, cycle power, you get the normal boot up text. Then on the boot menu, you're going to choose S for service. You have 59 seconds to choose that. The USB stick, and you'll see here is a screenshot of my USB stick. Forget the middle one there, the .done. That file actually gets put on there once you do your upgrade. So if you do your upgrade and you forget and leave the stick in there, if you go back and do service again, I haven't tested this, but I believe the intent of that is it's not going to want to install it again because it's got the flag on there that it's been done already. So if you want to do it again, you just delete that file. But the two files you must have on there is the .tgz file and the signature file for that. So those two files on your USB stick, plug it in, hit S for service, and then hit Y for yes to continue, and it'll restore it. And then you'll see on the front, it'll come back and give you that it's at 4494. If you did the reset to factory, whatever version you were running, it's still going to say it on the screen there, 4.8. Whatever. So it's the service port, the service mode is what's going to be able to get it back to that earlier version. This is a screenshot I took of mine last night, and but you really can't tell, but the USB port, this is my USB stick right here, that's in there, and then the serial RJ45 is back behind the Ethernet cabling. But the main thing I have that there for is just to show the display that it does take you back to 4494. So with that, if I bring up my putty, and as you can see here, it's sitting where I was before, and I can hit C so the cows come home and nothing happens because it's timed out. But what I wanted to do is we could start with a new session just so you can see how this works. I have a save session, so I could say load, but my speed, as I said, is 115,200. Serial connections, you have your baud rate, 8 bits for data bits, one stop bit, no parity, no flow control. And then once you have that, you're sitting at the screen, and what we have to do, let's see if I can do this without losing my headset. I need to go cycle power on my CIPer 50. All right, of course I got to take my headset off. Hold on a second. And then get over here quickly before it boots up, and I get 3 seconds to hit OK, or to hit C, I mean. So now we're in putty, it's starting up. We got 3 seconds, I hit C, and now we have 30 seconds to do the next option. So we'll just go down the menu. We'll hit 1 for login. And I already have it commissioned, so I use my setup. And then from this menu, I got 59 seconds to choose what I want to do. And again, once it times out, your shell mode is shut down and you have to reboot or power cycle the Jace, or the CIPer 50 to get back in here. So we can go in the network setup. We can see how it's set up. And if we want to go in and change something, we can by hitting the numbers here corresponding to what we want to do. And then if I just say exit, discard, I say exit, and it should, that's interesting. So I was expecting it to take me back to the configuration menu, and it looks like when you exit from here, it actually logs you out all the way. So you have to power cycle again to get back in. So hopefully it's not if you're working with something critical, you just got to keep in mind that you do have to power cycle to get back in. So I do that, power plug back in. Just wait for it to come up. Okay, now we're back to that boot menu. And our next option there, where we do the reset to factory defaults. I'm just hitting lowercase f, so it doesn't matter if it's upper or lower. All right, reset factory conditions. Do you want to continue? Yes. There's no enter, it just takes it. And then it's done. So now what I want to do, since it went to factory defaults, I want to log in. I want to change the, I can't talk and type at the same time. I want to go in and change the IP address back to where I was. So you can see we've reset the factory default. So there's the factory default IP address. So we want to do 2. And again, you saw the countdown from 59 seconds. Do 192.168.1.241 is where I want it. S to save it. And we need to reboot since it's a since we changed the IP address. So now we can go back to configuration and move on to the next piece if we want. I'm going to let that time out. What I want to do is come back to, let's see, is this the one? 4748. Okay, so now we can, in my workbench, see, I left it as the credentials I had set up in there, and I got to wait for it to time out because we did the reset. So it's not going to let me in until I put in Tritium Niagara. It's the problem with Workbench. It'd be nice if they had a cancel button, but they don't. So now if we go back in here and do Tritium Niagara, it hasn't, since I had a power cycle, it hasn't come up yet. So we got to wait for it to come back up. So it's no different. Yeah, it is like a JSON, in fact, in as much as it takes a bit of time for it to boot up to log back into it. And I'm the impatient type, so I like to keep retrying, even though I can see the LEDs blinking on it, that they weren't ready. I think it's ready now, though. So that comes up for my certificate. And again, since it's a reset to factory defaults, it's forcing us to put in new credentials and passphrase. I learned to not talk while I'm typing because I won't get it right. So now we've done that, we can get in, and from this point you could do a commission, or you can go into distribution file installer and do a restore. But if we go to platform administration, what I wanted to show is that we did restore back to factory defaults, but we're still sitting at 4.8. So it didn't take us down to that earlier version. And you'll see the time zone. It went back to Greenwich Mean Time. So you got to set that again. So now that we see where we are with that and say, oh, well, we really need to go back to 4.4, we would need to go back to our shell mode and do the service. Now I got to cycle power again. And hopefully I can do it without pulling the terminal all the way out. That's better. Okay. Now that I cycle power, shell is becoming active again. This time we're going to be reverting it back to 4.4. So I just told it to go into service mode. I already have my thumb drive plugged into the USB port on the CIPer 50. So it's ready to go. So then we just hit yes to continue. And now it's going to restore those earlier firmware versions. So it's a real simple process. It's just a matter of having the right cabling and know where to go to do this. One thing I found this morning in doing some more testing with this was that when you go through this process and restore it back to 4.4, I then went in and commissioned it with 4.8 with a station. Everything went through fine, but there was one platform serial service file that didn't get installed, and it was a video I made up a month ago that the serial ports are missing, and I couldn't get my BACnet MSTP port working, so I went under the serial service underneath platform services and found that the serial port was missing. So you need to go back to platform, and in the software manager you need to reinstall the platform, the plat serial file that was part of my video. Now what I did do, I added it here, so if anybody has that problem, they can just go here, click, and it brings up the procedures on what to do with that. So now we are back up, so I should be able to go in now with my 4.47. Let's see if this is 4.8. Okay, I'm in 4.8, so I can go back into platform. No, I can't do that because it did reset the IP addressing. So we have to cycle power yet again and go back into shell, and I want to tell it what IP address I want to use. So these are things you want to take into consideration. You either do it that way, or you got to change your PC to the same subnet that the Jace ports are set for. Let's see. So we got to do network settings too. Save, reboot. So now I need to just wait for it to boot up enough that we can log in. But basically, that whole process of going through and doing this doesn't take that long to do it, but there's those little steps you have to, make sure you remember to do, or remember that what's happening in the background with the IP addresses going back to default and whatnot. While we're waiting for that, under my references page, the CIPer 50 installation and commissioning guide has information there on that cabling. Guy Zebrick's FAQ, Volume 4, he has some screenshots of making that cabling up. That file can be found on our BP Tech Center. The firmware restore I did is from a zip file I received from Web Squad late last week, and I've included a Dropbox link here to be able to get to that. It has their Word doc with it, as well as the zip file of their two files that are required to do that service restore. So I just want to make sure you're aware that those things are there. So now we can get back into our, did it again, get back into our CIPer 50. You got to put in the default username and password since we reset it. Again, default passphrase, so we got to create a new one. Platform username. Finish. We can check to see what version it in fact did restore to. So now you'll see that the version is 4.4.94. Core software is 4.4.94. So it did go back. You'll see the time zone is off. So we could from here change date and time, and it's going to want to reboot. So I don't want to do that yet. We can go underneath our license manager. And here you'll see, okay, so it keeps our certificates for some reason, but it doesn't keep the licensing when you do that. So as long as you have an internet access from your machine, you can go in and tell it to import the licenses. Or you could do that through the, when you're doing the commissioning wizard as well. But at this point, you're back to a factory image like it's out of the box. So at this point, you have a couple options. You can go into platform administration and go to commissioning. If you have a station you want to copy in there, if you actually have a backup of one, you could actually just go into distribution file installer and have it restore a backup that you might have. This one's not, for whatever reason, they're not letting me do that. So we'll go over here. Go into commission. And I want to make sure we install modules, sync time. So we can go ahead. This is just the usual setup. Make sure WB, UX are checked. The station you want to transfer. And then you're off to the races and getting this configured and up and running. So that takes you through everything that's required to be able to do that. We don't need to wait for all that to show that it came back. At least I can get it started. So that's that is the shell for the CIPer 50, and as I said, it is very different from a standard Jace shell mode, software-wise and cabling-wise. So that's it for this topic. I don't know if there's any questions or comments. Now would be the time to ask those, or we can end this session and move on with our day.